Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings together prominent New Yorkers with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowski Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. By the time this program airs, Mayor Bloomberg will have released a proposed budget expected to be in the neighborhood of $60 billion, which even for our very rich mayor is a very rich neighborhood. The city budget is the fourth largest in the nation, topped only by the federal government, New York State, and California. As the financial capital of the world, New York is dependent on economic sectors known as FIRE for finance, insurance, and real estate. I don't know how insurance is doing, but there are problems in both the financial world, as evidenced by the billowing effects of the subprime mortgage crisis, and in real estate, as property values and income from property sales begin to take a dip after years of increases. That means less money and more pressure on budget makers. The budget now goes to the city council, which is embroiled in its own controversies over how it doles out tens of millions of dollars in what are called member items, generally to local nonprofit groups that are the bulwark of social services throughout the city. Council Speaker Christine Quinn, who has championed transparency in letting the public know which member sponsored which item, has been forced to deal with allegations of improper allocation of those member items, including the indictment of 2 staff members of 1 council member linked to a member-funded organization. It's important to remember that New York City has been a model of fiscal rectitude ever since the near financial collapse of the 1970s, ushered in a series of outside overseers, including the Financial Control Board, which can take over the city's finances if the city ends the year significantly in the red. In fact, the city has balanced its budget and pretty much on time for 30 years, which is more than you can say of national and state leaders. So we enter a discussion of the city budget with side trips to Albany and Washington with 4 participants in that process. Jeff Sommer is the executive director of the aforementioned New York State Financial Control Board. Ronnie Lowenstein is executive director of the Independent Budget Office, created by the 1989 City Charter to provide another layer of outside analysis and oversight along the lines of the Congressional Budget Office in Washington. Eric Martin Delan is a city council member representing parts of Cypress Hills, Bushwick, and East New York and Brooklyn, and a chair of the borough of that borough's council budget negotiating team. And Kirsten Danis is the City Hall bureau chief for the Daily News, who will tell us what it all means. Let me start with you, Eric. The mayor is going to be, by the time this airs, the mayor will have the budget out. We seem to be facing an economic downturn. How do you guys balance increasing demands against fiscal realities?
It's always been a difficult process. We've done it since I came to the council in 2000. Every year there's difficult choices to make, and I'm sure that we're going to be facing some difficult financial decisions this year. We were anticipating potentially increasing the property tax again. It appears, based on what I read in the Daily News today, that that may necessarily not have to be, and I'm proud of that because it would have been difficult for me to revisit that issue. I don't know that I could have done it. But clearly the city needs the services. Spending has gone up tremendously. And it's not because of new programs. There's items such as pensions have risen, salaries have risen, and a lot of the fixed costs that the city must spend has risen throughout the years, and it kind of curtails our ability somewhat to cut spending. But I think in light of what's happening nationally, it'd be prudent for us as a city to slow down and try to curtail spending as much as possible so that we can keep the city in the best shape possible for the years to come.
Some of that increase is, I think, also a function of mandates from the state Medicaid areas like that I want to get into at some point. Jeff, we're in an anomaly of people preaching fiscal disaster on the horizon, and we're sitting with a fairly large budget surplus right now.
That's correct. We're in a transition period, clearly. For a number of years, there's been a boom on Wall Street. Security industries' profits have been at record levels. Corporate tax returns, personal income tax returns have been coming in at record levels. There are 2 what used to be small taxes on property, real estate transactions, property transfer tax, mortgage recording tax, which used to be worth a couple of $100 million, now are worth over $1 billion because of the rising value of those properties and the sales over the number of years. So the city has managed to their credit, build up surpluses over the prior years. Instead of spending all the money, they have increased spending, but not spent all of it, which have happened in the past, in the 80s. And that surplus is going to allow the city to probably balance the fiscal 2009 budget, which has, without the surplus, probably over a $5 billion deficit. And out-year projections are in fiscal 2010, that deficit to be close to $5 billion again. The trick for the city is that as revenue still comes in, and is still coming in at pretty high levels, and that surplus will be pretty significant when the fiscal year ends June 30th, is how do they still convince the public that actions need to be taken, because all the economic news in the areas where the city relies heavily, in the securities industry in particular, are bad. And so all of our predictions are, while we're still getting the benefit of the 2007 boom, we are going to see a collapse of those revenues during fiscal 2009. And the current budget at this point has no surplus built in to help 2010. So that budget gap in 2010 will have to be closed either by reduced services or increased expenditures, or taking actions early so you can try to build up that surplus in 2009 to stave off crisis cuts.
Ronnie, you were quoted in the Times saying that the IBO does its own financial forecast and assessments of the state of the economy, and that you think it's turning worse than you had earlier anticipated.
We put out our most recent forecast back in March, which seems like a long time ago, and since then, as Jeff indicated, the news has been bad. We were forecasting that Wall Street profits would be barely positive for 2007 as a whole, and instead what we found is that they came in at losses of $11 billion. That's a huge difference, and that will be factored into the next round of forecasting. Our next forecast comes out towards the end of this month.
Kirsten, this is, among other things, an election year, and the people who are going to be making decisions, Eric and others, are elected officials. Some of them are running for office this year. You have municipal elections coming down the pike next year. How much of politics figures into what's going on?
I don't think politics ever figure into a budget.
Is that what, sorry, where do you work?
I mean, politics have a lot to do with it. You have quite a few council members who are trying to vie for state office this year in the fall because of term limits. And you have a speaker who may be running for mayor next year and wants to set up a solid budget for next year, but also wants to fight for various constituencies. So I think that that's going to come into play as the resources dwindle. As we all know, the fighting gets tougher, and there will be a lot of competition for a smaller amount of money.
Eric, this is, we could do the mega fiscal analysis, but in fact, this money is spent on services. And this is not, these dollars factor into whether it's opening up a senior center or it's providing a whole range of social services in neighborhoods like yours and neighborhoods around the city. Do those services get held hostage? Do they get lost? I mean, actually, I think it's your guys' job to keep those things front and center.
I think there's always concerns. I think some of them are being held hostage now. I think the fact that NYCHA, even in good budgets, has,
the Housing Authority.
The New York City Housing Authority has faced tremendous deficits, some of it due to decreased reimbursements from the federal government, but that there's city actions that could have been taken to help NYCHA's plight, and as a result of some of the pressures that we haven't been able to do everything that we would have liked to do.
And NYCHA is home, there's about 200,000 apartments, about 600,000 people. I grew up in a city housing project.
NYCHA is, if you want to talk about true affordable housing where there's not a question line, NYCHA is definitely it. So.
Also, a similar question about services. If in fact we're in this tough, what services do you see potentially taking a hit?
Well, we can look back at where the cutbacks have already occurred, because this administration, along with the council, have already done cuts for this year and next year, and the mayor had asked agencies to even propose additional cuts for next year and the year after. And what the administration chose to do was largely across-the-board cuts. Not every single agency was hit. And it was interesting, the Department of Buildings, which has been so much in the news the last few weeks, was not asked to take the cuts. But generally speaking, agencies were asked to cut 2.5% out of the current year's budget and 5% out of next year's budget. The ultimate cuts were
schools,
including education, nothing, police, education, and that sort of across-the-board cut would seem to set the pattern, from the administration's point of view at least, of how to proceed. The administration also, I think, strongly signaled that they didn't want to give up on the property tax cuts, either the rebates or the cut in the rate that had been done several years ago. So that seems to be the game plan. Whether the game plan shifts if things get worse will be something interesting to watch. The other thing to say about all of this, though, is that if you're expecting 2010 to be a very heavy lift, the sooner we start doing whatever it is we're going to do to bring the budget into balance, and there are only a finite number of things you can do, whether it's cutting back on spending or raising taxes, the sooner you start that, the easier it is to do.
The state, how much are we affected by the state budget? I mean, the state budget faces the same kinds of problems. They're dumping a bunch of mandates. They continue to dump a bunch of mandates on us. Medicaid costs go up. You know, we're kind of unique in having to pick up 25% of the cost.
Well, Medicaid's actually a very interesting situation because it used to be one of the big growth areas in the city budget, but the state a number of years ago, as a mandate relief item, capped city spending at a 3% growth rate. And so they pick up the rest. So that is, it's still a large number. 3% is a large number in the budget, but it's not the growing areas. The problem for the city is that the areas where there has been growth in spending have been either in areas that are clearly this administration's priorities, education, public safety, and in fixed costs, not things that are uncontrollable because decisions have been made to have these costs. But debt service, every time the city increases their capital program, which it has done every year in this administration and beyond, for projects that are all very well worth it and needed, debt service takes over a larger and larger share of the budget. At this point, it's estimated that it takes about 12 cents of every tax dollar and is expected to grow to 16 to 18 cents of every tax dollar, depending on how, as revenues drop, that takes a bigger share.
Just as a budget, just as budget 101,
interest on the loan.
I mean, you have two parts of a budget. You have an expense budget that pays to hire cops and provide services. You have a capital budget that essentially is infrastructure. It's supposed to be infrastructure investment. Capital budget is where you issue bonds, but the money you take to pay those bonds comes out of the expense budget.
The other areas are healthcare costs, which everybody knows, both for mainly for employee health benefits as part of the collective bargaining agreements, and the salaries and contracts that have been entered into that go out to 2012 are the growing areas in the budget. So when you're faced with having to cut back, if you eliminate the areas that are your priorities or that are fixed, it leaves you very little areas to go to just deal with it on an expenditure reduction. The city cannot solve the 2010 problem purely by reducing expenditures. It needs to do that, but it also is going to need to look at either additional revenues or other funding sources. When you asked about the state, the state executive budget that was proposed had major cuts. By the time it was adopted, I think the city, the state will say they gave the city a lot of money, the city will say they cut a lot of money. Basically, I think they came out pretty good in a wash. But the state has a worse fiscal problem than the city does. While the city is facing a surplus this year, the state faced a $4 billion deficit that they had to close and faces even a larger one next year than the city faces. So the city cannot expect to get bailed out by the state giving additional money, and they may actually get cuts and reduce state aid.
We were talking about services. You've covered a number of budgets. I covered the budgets when I was a reporter back in the 90s when they were $35 billion. It's hard to believe it's like $25 billion more in just 15 years. Among the cuts that the mayor has are things that obviously the political reality are going to be restored to cultural programs, to libraries. There's almost a budget dance every year where the mayor says we're going to cut those, and the council, this is the bread and butter for people who live in neighborhoods, will restore. I mean, is this a dance you've seen again and again?
Well, I think, Ronnie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think last year they took some pretty big steps to try to eliminate this. They what's the term again? They
Baseline.
They baseline libraries. And I write for
Very
the Daily News.
descriptive.
We don't use that word in the Daily News.
That's good.
Thanks. So they tried. I think the council speaker, Christine Quinn, and the mayor tried to baseline these cultural institutions so they wouldn't get caught up every year not knowing where their funding was coming from, which was very difficult for them, and something that did happen every year. The mayor would cut, the council would fight, and meanwhile the council's attention would be diverted from all kinds of other things going on in the budget. I don't expect that to be as bad this year. I think that, as Ronnie talked about, what you're really going to be dealing with are across-the-board cuts that will affect everyone, so that you're not going to be able to, the cops can't complain that they got cut, and education can't complain. The fight really is going to be about whose priorities should take precedent, and the mayor and the administration, I think, is going to say, well, there is no priority, everyone takes a cut.
Some of the cuts, for instance, in the police department, I mean, they've set a lower cap on the number of police officers, but they're not at that cap now. So
No.
some of it is kind of paper savings as
That's
opposed
right.
to,
The easy things are taken first, and then the harder things follow.
Yeah. For some agencies, it's not as easy to absorb the 3% cut than others. Some have budgets in the billions of dollars, and some have budgets only.
for instance.
Police department, fire department, Department of Ed. It's much easier for them to absorb a 3% cut than, say, the district attorney's office, who have much smaller budgets.
Yeah, but since I have kids in public schools, I do follow the education budget a little more closely.
Sure,
than
and
others.
I'm not.
But they're talking about that impact of as much as $100,000 per school. That when you take this cut, and a lot of the fat, frankly, has been taken out of.
And that's
the
it.
essential-
That's an
essential
issue.
services.
That's an issue for the council, because we would like to see if there are going to be cuts, and I believe the state did restore some of the $300 million that was taken out. That was restored in the final passage of the state budget, so that relieves a little bit of the decision making that we have to make. But we would have liked to have seen the cuts come centrally. We didn't want to see the cuts come to the individual schools. I actually had a list in my office that showed how much each and every school was going to get cut, and there were some astonishing numbers. On average, just for my district, we were looking at about $65,000 per school. And you do that citywide, and that's a big number coming out of the classroom, so that's a concern.
But it's coming out of classrooms, it's coming out of after-school programs, it's coming out of a whole broad range. It could be coming out of art teachers, science teachers.
Yeah, I guess it was at the principal's discretion as to how they come up with the cut, but it could have come a number of ways. It could have been less teachers, it could have been, say, a cluster teacher or two. It depends how the principal decided to make that cut, but it would have been at the principal's discretion to come up with that.
But if I can just make the point,
Please.
you can argue where you can take it, and that's for the elected officials and the administration to decide. But the bottom line from a fiscal point of view is, first of all, in education, you're talking about a cut from growth. It has been the biggest winner
Yes.
in this administration,
Yes.
both from the state and the city, on getting increases every year.
On the capital
So-
side as well.
On the capital side as well, especially on the capital side, actually. And so the proposed reduction in plan is from a figure that was growing, not from down.
Is that the case
on
in a
growing.
lot of areas of the budget?
No.
No.
And that's the problem with doing cuts in a lot of other agencies. The
Across
Board
the
of Ed has got a lot of money, so I know people don't want the Board of Ed to be cut, but if you start creating agencies that can't be cut, if you say that, if you right off the top of your head say, I can't cut education, I can't cut the police department, which is what we'd all say first if you were asked what two agencies can't be cut, you can't close the budget gap.
Doesn't give you much room.
There's not enough money in other places to provide the services people need. Parks did not get restored in the good times the way the police department and the Board of Ed did. So when you do a cut in the Parks department, you're potentially hitting bone, not fat. Right?
But isn't
People
that, but to some degree, I think the problem that the chancellor of the school system has made is that basically they're into bone when it comes to central staff, that they cannot absorb the decrease in the growth, if you will, that cut cannot be absorbed centrally. I mean, we've gone through a series of cutting central of central headquarters now for 15 years, 20 years, and at some point, you do need some level of middle management in order to run a school, a school system of over 1 million kids. So, have you looked at the education budget in particular?
Yes, and certainly in the latest round of cuts, a significant share did come out of Central. I should also stress that there are real problems with cutting mid-year if you're a principal. It's one thing to say, well, I'm not going to increase by as much next year, but when given an email saying cut out 65,000 from the remainder of the school year, it becomes much tougher. So yes, there were cuts from central administration. I think the administration tried to portray more of them as being central than in fact were the case. It turned out a lot more of the cuts were in fact going to directly impact schools, even if they were services that were being provided centrally and done on behalf of the schools. But it would be hard to sit here and say that there's absolutely nothing that remains to be cut from central administration at the Board of Ed.
Well,
Department of Ed, sorry.
Again, obviously these decision makers, much more so the council members because they're closer to neighborhoods than the mayor. I mean, you're about to see the budget dance also takes place on the steps of City Hall with activists, people who are supporting particular programs are going to start to be showing up on the steps of City Hall demanding, calling upon the council in particular. I mean, you guys get the brunt of the pressure in order to restore things. Schools in particular, senior services, where the city is looking to basically, I think, change. I work in that area to change kind of the neighborhood base of the way senior services are delivered. These are things that really affect that affect people's lives who depend on the city. We're not a Sun Belt city. Our level of social services are uniquely high compared to the rest of the country, but that's who we are. So do those people have an effect? Does the mayor ignore them? I mean, the mayor is, the mayor doesn't have to run for re-election.
Yeah, does the mayor ignore to some extent, he ignores them. Yeah, he does. He kind of scurries past them. He makes a joke all the time that when protesters show up at City Hall, he claims that they stop, put down, and see him, that they stop, put down their signs, pose for pictures, get autographs, and then as he leaves, they go back to protesting him. This is a certain level of fantasy there, I think, but I mean, it may have been known to happen. But I think his point, and it's not a bad one, is that that's for show, and it will happen a lot. But most of this, I think, Eric would probably say it goes on behind the scenes, and there is a large amount of pressure that I'm sure you face, and it's hard to say no when you're talking about real people and real kids and real seniors.
It is, especially with seniors. I think what you're referring to is not only the social service change, but it's specifically the decision to go to frozen meals as a cost savings measure, which some of us see as
in the Meals on Wheels program.
Yes, right? Which some of us see as maybe a little bit disrespectful to the elder generation who's built this city. Obviously, all the senior service providers are against it. The seniors are against it. The members, by and large, fought back this service change post 9/11 when we had that fiscal crisis, and found other ways to relieve the budget deficits around the senior service sector. What we did then was we basically did a funding swap with NYCHA to pick up the cost of senior centers to keep the services open and alive. And I think there was, on the meals, there was just large opposition from the members, and it would have been tough to pass a budget with that in there.
But yet the city is looking to make that change now.
Well, it's a recommendation from the commissioner. I guess it has to all be played out within the next few months.
In that Time story that you were extensively quoted in, they were comparing the different. I want to bring you in this too, on the different recessions. I mean, are we in a recession? And I had always thought that we because of the strength of the financial sector and the fact that we don't have a manufacturing base anymore, entered recessions late and came out of recessions late, and I've learned that I'm not correct.
No, I think typically every recession is different. Certainly the two most recent recessions, 2001 and then in the early 90s, both a strong financial sector involvement in the
2001 is very unique in the sense that it was that it followed the attack on the World Trade
Well,
Center.
it
we had gone into a
preceded it.
downturn
Well, it
beforehand.
preceded, right,
Yeah,
but that
employment
exacerbated-
peaked in December 2000.
It
that-
would
but
have
that
happened,
exacerbated
it would
it
have happened
intensely.
even if 2000, even
Yep.
if September 11th hadn't
Right,
happened.
of
the
course.
city would have had fiscal trouble, and it got exacerbated. By
Right. But for the most recent downturn, that one, we probably went into recession about the same time as the rest of the country as a whole. It took us somewhat longer to come out. The recession before, we went in several years before the rest of the country. We stayed in far longer than the rest of the country, and we were affected far more deeply.
Is that because it was focused in the financial services sector, which is our
Very much so.
meat and potatoes?
And that's what makes people most worried about the current problems. That to the extent this started with the housing sector, but is now so much of it is focused on the financial sector, that suggests to a lot of analysts that we could be particularly hard hit.
And how does that, I mean, is there any way to quantify if, in fact, there's an $11 billion loss on Wall Street as opposed to a small gain? What is that, is there any way to quantify the amount of that loss to the city treasury?
And that's a large part of our job. The charter specifies that IBO, along with OMB, do complete forecasts of the city's tax revenues. And ask me on March 20th when we release.
On April,
it's
April 20th, I'm sorry.
On May 20th.
But it's in the,
May, yeah, right.
it's
Okay.
in the
we're-
hundreds of millions of dollars.
So hundreds of millions. So
I'm not going to give you a number,
Right,
but
nope.
you're not talking about $10 or $20. You're talking about a drop like that in securities industry profits in the hundreds of millions of dollars affecting the
Or more.
Affecting the personal income tax, the general corporation tax, other business taxes, and there's a ripple effect throughout. You know, the sales tax got affected because people have less money to spend. I mean, it has a ripple effect throughout the whole thing. The current situation, what I was talking about before about the transition period, is while those profits drop $11 billion, bonuses in the securities industry was $38 billion, which was a little less than last year, which was a record year, and was high. So we're still seeing the benefit of those bonuses
Because
in
those-
tax
because
collections
those
because
are-
people got it for the prior year. But next year, everybody's expectation is that's not going to happen again. And you try to calculate and you try to be conservative. And the mayor and the city council together have done a tremendous job over the last number of years of being conservative in the mayor and his revenue forecast and the council and accepting them in negotiations.
Well, the council has no choice.
Well-
I mean, the mayor dictates the revenue
The
number,
mayor dictates
period.
the revenues,
Thank
but
you. I
the
was about
council
to say,
and the
not sure, not sure if we accepted
sometimes
them.
those estimates change during negotiations,
Just
so
so
there
everybody-
is a joint agreement ultimately.
Yes.
Just so everybody
That will
understands,
live with
one of the, the degree to which a budget is a kind of a policy blueprint as well as a fiscal blueprint for what a city's priorities are. There's a revenue side and an expense side. To me, the real power that makes this a mayor-dominated government is, in fact, that the mayor gets to set the revenue number. That the mayor said, and you can't spend any more of that. And the council has to work under. There's no negotiated. I believe that is not the case in Washington. And that is.
You said in your opening that one of the positives of the city budget process is it's always on time and balanced for the last. And the reason for that is that exact problem. The problem in Albany and why they've been late is you have to have three parties agree on revenues before they even start talking about how to split it up.
Well, so
and that delays the
also
process.
mandated to be balanced, unlike the state.
Well, I mean, because you're
of-
sitting
right.
there ready to take over to become the mayor.
We're sitting there.
I mean, is it
The
still?
law requires the budget to be balanced according to generally accepted accounting principles within $100 million, which is a postage stamp on a $60 billion budget.
But if it is beyond that, the Financial Control Board has the authority or the obligation, I don't know what the right word is, to come in and, in essence, take over
Up
the
until
city.
July 1st, the control board can reimpose a control period, which the control period was put in place in '75 and ended in 1986 when
And
the city balanced
just give
its
them a
budget.
brief history lesson on 75 and why you guys exist.
1975 was a different kind of fiscal crisis than we face now. It was the problem occurred when not the city but a state agency, the Urban Development Corporation, defaulted on a bond that was issued under the full faith and credit of the state.
That means they couldn't
They
pay
couldn't
back the
make
bondholders.
payments, the bondholders. And at that point, The large holders of city bonds and notes were the big banks in the city. And they started to look very closely, and they came to the conclusion that the city had no idea at that point, and had no financial management system, how much outstanding debt it had, either short or long term, and was actually issuing long-term debt to pay for operating costs, which are basically they were paying police salaries with 30-year bonds as opposed to out of tax revenues. And the credit markets closed on the city, and the city could issue either short-term notes to pay expenses or long-term bonds to do capital construction projects. And what got created in the short term is the Municipal Assistance Corporation to issue new debt, and the Emergency Financial Control Board to kind of take over control of the city's budget and help them develop a 4-year financial plan with quarterly modifications and the requirement for budget balance under a very strict guideline of generally accepted accounting principles, which no other municipality or, I believe, state has to do.
Just the 4-year planning, the discipline imposed on the city, I think, has really served the city well, and forcing it to have a 4-year plan. You have to, in January, I think it is, they come out and they say, this is where we see the city going over the next 4 years. No other government in the country
And
has
it's
to do
modified quarterly, both for the current year and the 3 years out.
Let me go tell us your name and your campus.
Hi, good evening. Yes, my name is Leonora Girardi. I go to York College in the evening, and my major is political science, and my minor is environmental. Whoever wishes to answer this question is fine with me. I have a question regarding the budget and the Federal Reserve's input in lowering the intrest. My understanding from doing a little research is that that interest technically has not helped the home buyers, or the people wanting to buy homes at this point, because it technically has not lowered the interest rates for mortgages. It's really lowering the bank's interest, and it's helping the banks more than the people. How do you see that, and how do you see that as beneficial or negative?
Does anybody want to handle that?
Let me try it. Certainly, again, every recession is different, and in this one, the Fed's traditional policy levers of lowering interest rates haven't quite worked out the way one would have hoped. What the Fed has been facing, particularly in the last couple of months, is a credit crunch, and even banks and other institutions either unwilling or unable to lend. So they've been working, I think, fairly creatively to try to find ways to take some of those not good assets off of the books of some major financial corporations in a way to try to push additional lending, whether it's for home mortgages or anything else.
I mean, in terms of the subprime mortgage crisis, which I suspect is affecting your district in particular, I suspect a lot of people have been drawn into, there's an old saying that I'm going to update, instead of millions, I'll say billions, is that if you owe the bank $1,000, the bank owns you. If you owe the bank $1 billion, you own the bank. And so, while you see the bailouts of the Bear Stearns, in terms of allowing them to be purchased, you don't see that same kind of bailing out of smaller homeowners as in your district.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the way it affects us, from my perspective, it affects us on a very broad scale. In terms of what the overall revenue number will be. But from my perspective, as it was said, we really don't set that number. The number's pretty much given to us, and then we decide what happens there. It's definitely affecting the overall city economy, because I see the signs, I see everything that is being said in the news, I see it playing out in my district every day. But yet and still, as we've heard today, that the revenues are up, and I was actually surprised to read that today. And it has effect maybe more on the state and federal economies. It does affect us, but it's maybe too broad for me to get a hold of it.
Okay. Can I just say one thing? It's not that revenues are up, they're just above what the city had anticipated. So in fact, the Independent Budget Office's forecast for this year and next year were actually declines in tax revenues. Now, that's coming off of a series of extraordinary years, as Jeff made clear. But we were forecasting tax revenues, particularly those cyclically sensitive revenues, in the business taxes, in the property transfer taxes, to decline. And it looks like particularly for the property transfer taxes, that's what we're going to see by the end of the year.
Yes.
So we're already beginning to see some declines, but right now the city's pretty much on track or a little above where they had anticipated being as most recently as January.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Arnold Garcia. I'm a senior student at John Jay College. My question is, based on what I heard here, they're talking about budget cuts in education. What about in HIV services? How is this going to affect the people that get the services from this?
That's something that the council has traditionally fought to restore in our quote-unquote budget dance with the mayor. I know that it's something that the members feel is a priority to continue to fund. I don't think our priority has changed. So I think that the sentiment of at least the institution that I serve in is that we want to protect the services for HIV and AIDS patients, but as part of anything we do, it's subject to negotiation, but I think there's strong support for it in the council.
Do you see HIV programs, a lot of other programs that become kind of caught in this dance? You know, again, it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and people who are more organized are more likely to get the kinds of restorations. Is that still the case?
I think it's always the case. And I mean, things are going to be cut. They absolutely will be cut. And if they're not cut, I think Eric would agree that I think that would be probably pretty irresponsible of the city going forward, despite the $4 billion budget. Everyone says we're in for a very, very rough road ahead.
From my perspective, I prefer to cut than raise taxes, but I want to cut responsibly.
Right. I mean, and there you go. There's the rub. Cutting responsibly. You know,
not easy to do.
There are going to be things that are cut. It could be HIV services.
And why don't you want to cut?
Anything.
Why don't you want to raise taxes?
Well, because I think people are overburdened. I mean, what's going on in our economy and in the employment rate and people's mortgages, if we increase the property tax with assessment going up, I think the numbers we see now on foreclosures would only go up even higher. There's an increase in water rates potentially. At some point, you know, people lose the ability to pay, and most of the cuts that come basically on the middle class, and whenever there's a tax on the wealthy, is met with a lot of resistance, and I think it's unfair. Everybody should share the burden.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Feruza Kinsiglia, and I'm from Brooklyn College. And my question is particularly to CUNY students: how will this affect our budget? Should we be expecting a tuition rise, or to
I
anyone?
think there was a commitment not to raise. Hasn't there been a commitment not to raise tuition? I mean, I don't know.
No, I mean, the most recent state budget, CUNY had proposed in the CUNY Compact annual relatively modest increases, and everybody's idea of what a modest increase, I suspect, differs, but that was not adopted at the state level this year.
Not if it's up to Charles Barron, he'd make it free for all students, but I don't know that we can afford to do that.
Well, in fact,
at one point it used to be free.
When I went to Brooklyn College, we paid. It was a free school, and this is back in the 1960s. We paid student fees of $30 each semester. And when they raised it to $50, this is in the late 1960s, we shut the school down. But I'm not recommending that.
Yeah, be careful.
We're students today.
Be careful.
Hey, I'm Elysian Pena. I come from the College of Staten Island, long way. All right, so since there was poor oversight over the financial sector by the federal government and, you know, by themselves, you know, they should have been able to take care of themselves too. Is there any ideas that New York City is taking maybe to maybe revoke tax breaks or something like that? Because I know that they get a lot of tax breaks. And
Well, there were tax breaks for certain economic development initiatives that the city has put in, and the mayor tried to rein a lot of those in and tie them more closely to actually performing on the promises that some of these companies have made, which haven't always been met in terms of job. I mean, do you have a sense when you look at this, the kinds of corporate tax breaks that I think you're referring to?
I think they normally come up in the discussions on economic development or on retentions of major corporations who threaten to move to New Jersey or to other areas, and they come up. I don't think it's been Ronnie may have a
Okay.
better handle on the amount that's been going on.
Oh, it's been going on for many years, but the issue is if you've already granted a tax cut to a corporation in exchange for remaining in New York or agreeing to add a certain number of jobs, the city can't abrogate that agreement. They can't say, oh, changed our minds, you know, we're going to actually jack up your property tax in advance of when we said we would because times are tough. Certainly, particularly in this administration, when these companies fail to meet their agreements, many of the agreements have what's called clawback provisions to allow the city to move aggressively to, you know, up their taxes to where they should have been. But I don't think anyone is suggesting that the city go back on agreements they've made with firms in the past.
Some of those firms, though, I mean, wasn't there a deal with Bear Stearns, for instance, for you know, for some kind of tax breaks? And obviously, Bear Stearns doesn't exist anymore. They can't meet that. They can't meet their obligations under it.
Yes, but they've been acquired, albeit at a very low price, by
the
J.P.
federal
Morgan
government
Chase.
moving into areas of bailouts that they never have done before, in terms of which gives you one indication of the seriousness of
In
the
that
fiscal
instance,
threat.
the tax break that the city cut may actually work to the benefit of the city in that instance.
In the sense of?
In the sense that even under the acquisition, those jobs will still be protected, and the new entity that bought out Bear Stearns will have to live up to the agreement also.
So the agreement goes with the company.
Yes.
Yeah. But if in fact, you know, there are the level of layoffs at Bear Stearns that many at Bear Stearns expect, then if there were clawback provisions, and I don't know the specifics of the deal they cut.
Clawback.
Clawbacks.
A great term.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
My name is Takasel. I go to Queens College. I've been hearing rumors about the cigarette tax going up $1.50 a pack. I don't know when this is going to happen. If it is, if it's statewide, what kind of effect will this have on alleviating the deficit for the 2010 budget?
Well, it's supposed to go up 50 cents, right?
The state, in its recently enacted budget, raised the cigarette tax.
By $2 a pack, I think. Wasn't it something like
It's
that?
$1.50.
$1.50. Yeah.
$1.
Tax, yeah.
And
A
so that's
lot.
going to go into effect. In fact, that act, the city has its own tax on cigarettes, which they asked to be raised as well, which did not get raised. So actually, there's a slight reduction in revenue, which the state is supposed to hold the city harmless on, of about $25 million that they would have lost because the state has taken the city's tax on cigarettes. So it's not going to help the city's budget situation in 2010 at all, but it helped the state budget situation in the current year.
But that's both. I mean, but the mayor would argue that there's an ancillary health benefit there by discouraging.
He would argue it's not a revenue
primary,
item; it's a health item.
But they just on that point alone. I mean, let me bring you in this one thing because I remember when I covered this is, for instance, parking tickets. There's a vast increase in parking tickets.
Yep.
The city always claims that there's not a revenue issue; that it is strictly a street enforcement issue. Do you believe that?
No, I
No.
don't. I
Do
don't
you believe that?
No.
Do you believe that?
Well, we take in more in parking tickets than it costs us to write them, yes.
But I mean, this is. I guess I really can't ask you if this is your motivation. But I mean, this is. It's one of the. I mean,
That's
ticketing.
interesting.
I mean, talking about taxes. I mean, these are in essence taxes that aren't called taxes. More so than on parking, is you see small business districts, which are the mainstay of this city, especially in neighborhoods like the ones that you represent, which see incredible numbers of sanitation tickets, and which is almost the cost of doing business in this city, isn't it?
Well, the owners certainly expect it. That's one of the biggest frustrations about owning in New York is all the nickel and dime kind of taxes.
Well, the nickel and dimes
that you
now
get,
are $150.
Yeah,
so.
but they add up. They certainly add up, and they're never
Somebody
fun
has to
deal
move his car every day. I'm a great believer in suspension of ultimate side of the street parking
Yeah,
regulations.
I'm no different. They don't honor my parking permit. I pay my tickets. I don't get them on it.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my
Pardon
name
us
is-
complaining about our parking
That's
tickets.
okay. My name is Kalina Houston. I go to Brooklyn College. I'm wondering about the cuts with the schools. I know in different districts and different neighborhoods, different schools are appropriated different budgets. So I'm wondering when cuts go out, are they done in accordance with the budgets that the schools are already working with, or are they just system-wide cuts where the schools that are already working with lower budgets, oversized classrooms, are still being cut at the same level at schools that have smaller sized classrooms. Are these the same type of cuts?
Well, I can't speak to this year, so I don't remember the specifics, but the proposal for next year would assign the cuts to schools based upon the extent to which they were underfunded. And without getting into a whole discourse on what's underfunded and what's not, there's been a movement within the Department of Ed to better equalize funding across schools and have funding better represents the needs at each school, not just the number of students, but also their special needs, whether it's English language learners or special ed or whatever else. In their attempt to equalize that funding, some schools are designated as being below where they should have been, and if that's the case, those schools under the mayor's proposal would be cut by less.
But they would still take a cut.
They would still take a cut.
Formulas in this stuff is very, very complicated, so I don't want you to explain the formula in any great detail. Yes.
That's good.
Hi, my name is Carlos. I'm coming from Queens College. My question is really, I just would like to get an answer from a professional board as to, I'm sure you guys are all aware that the economic stimulus package checkers are being shipped out. And if we are in such a financial crisis, where is that money coming from? And also, to the councilman, what are you advising your constituents to do with that money once they get it?
Well, I think to answer the second part first, I would imagine that most of my constituents are going to get caught up with past bills that they have. My constituents don't make a lot of money, and the average income in my district is about $26,000 a year. So they're not gonna, they're not gonna take it and go out and eat at nice restaurants. Some of them will, but for the most part, they're gonna pay up any outstanding debt, like credit card, or they're gonna get caught up on their rent, or they're gonna take care of some past problem that happened. Where the money comes from, unlike the city, the federal government doesn't have to be balanced at the end of every budget year. The federal government basically has a license to print money, and that's what they're doing.
The federal deficit, which there are the Republicans, of course, are supposed to be the fiscally conservative ones, and it's the Clinton administration that ran significant surpluses that this administration has kind of reversed. Mm-hmm. What does that mean to a city like New York, as an economic?
Well, one, it affects the whole economic climate in the securities industry and everywhere else. The optimism, everything else has a trickle down effect, but it also means you can't expect federal aid in areas of education or another. So when you get No Child Left Behind, it comes with no money or very little money, but another mandate. And so you can expect that there's less money to spend in areas that could possibly help the Housing Authority, which got cutbacks in federal funding, excuse me, and in other areas of community development.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Eric Gauthier. I'm a student at College of Staten Island. I'm a political science major. And this is a general question with regards to the financial crisis now, and with city legislation prime time coming up. What sort of bills do you see getting more likely passed? I mean, we saw with congestion pricing fail. So it's not all about just getting money from people.
I'm personally happy about that.
But what kind of bills would you see getting?
Well, I'd say it depends. Most of the stuff that I focus on, I'm the chair of the housing committee, so we work on a lot of housing legislation. Right now with the buildings department, we're working on right now a package of safety legislation. A lot of these items don't have a major impact on the budget. Obviously, I would say any legislation that would have a huge cost to it that would increase spending to any city agency would have a tough time getting passed in reference to your question. So I would think it's maybe not what type of bill is passed, but maybe if a bill that's a great idea but maybe costs $60 million, let's say lead paint, right, that got passed several years ago. The concept of the lead paint bill was a great idea, but it came with a $60 million a year price tag. I think in this type of financial climate, bills with a price tag that hefty get scaled down in terms of cost to the city before they get passed.
Talking about congestion pricing, I want to bring you in on this. The mayor has invested an immense amount of political capital, frankly pushed the council into approving it, saying, don't worry, Albany will give you political cover, and of course that did not work. Does that weaken his hand? I mean, he also was trying to establish some degree of legacy as he goes out of office next year. I mean, is he politically damaged?
In budget negotiations? I don't think so. The mayor holds a lot of cards in budget negotiations. I mean, it's such a mayor-centric form of government that I don't think he's particularly damaged going into this. He just has too much power. Is he politically damaged? I suppose. I mean, depending on what he wants to do. I mean, if he wants to run for governor, I think, it could hurt him, maybe. If he wants to go spend all his money on charity, then no, he's just fine.
Well, same question to you. I mean, obviously you don't want to say we think he's weak and we're going to pick his pocket, but it's a pretty good pocket to try to pick.
I think Ms. Dennis is absolutely right. I think where he's affected would be getting the city's agenda through Albany. That's where he'd be affected. And it's not so much that the congestion pricing plan failed. I guess maybe, and I'm not sure. I know this was an item that was high priority for the mayor, and some of the rhetoric post-failure was kind of hostile. So maybe some of the feelings will calm down up in Albany, but there were a lot of people who were maybe offended by some of the comments.
We've got about 5 minutes left. Let me try to get a few more questions in.
Yeah, my name is Gabriel Engel. I'm a student at Brooklyn College, a political science major. And my question is also about congestion pricing. The MTA, the representatives from MTA stated that without the congestion pricing, building the Second Avenue line cannot be financed. That they need the money. So I was wondering that how will they finance the Second Avenue line now? And that's.
I mean, the degree. Let me ask you, our fiscal analyst, quickly. But I mean, the degree to which the MTA capital plan, which in part depends on the city, was affected.
The MTA capital plan, to a large extent, is unfunded, and
only partly funded.
Right, and they were counting on some portion of congestion pricing to fund part of it. It still wouldn't have covered everything.
Right, I mean, a $17 billion plan was not going to be covered by congestion
Paterson,
pricing.
after the defeat of congestion pricing, asked Richard Ravitch, the former chairman of the MTA, to have a panel to look at alternatives to both financing and to either changing the size and scope of the MTA capital program. So I think that'll be the avenue where the next proposals will come out of how to fund those projects.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Elise Wiggins. I attend Megavis College. I'm a public administration major. My question is, I heard you discuss a lot of the cuts in the budgets are going to be in education and social service programs. I'm wondering, how would you predict that that's going to affect the economically disadvantaged, like people in the lower income communities?
I think it's a very important question. I mean, we deal in mega numbers, and these affect, and that's kind of, that's part of the political pressure, I think, that comes from outside.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the panelists raised the point that there are agencies that can take cuts, which are actually kind of smaller growth, and education's one of them. But there are a lot of agencies that can't really take any, and it's gonna hurt. So I think that you will see real on the street effects from maybe not this budget, but next year's in real particular, I think.
I mean, this would affect, these kinds of services are very important, especially in your district.
Yeah, these are things that the council generally looks to restore. I'm optimistic that we'll be able to restore them this year.
In what areas, for instance?
I would say I have optimism around the senior services this year. I have optimism around education this year. I'm not as optimistic on NYCHA, which is unfortunate, and that's my biggest fight for me as a member personally. But I think most of the items we get in, I think there will be some across-the-board cuts. I do believe there will be some cuts to education in this budget. I don't think it'll be as bad as we initially expected during the preliminary budget hearings, because Governor Paterson and the state legislature came up with some money from education. So we have to see what that looks like now. But in the end, I'm optimistic that some of the services that really hit the ground level and hit the people, we will be able to restore those services.
We have less than a minute to go. I wanted to just ask you. There's always a bit of gloom and doom as you enter a budget cycle. Is it being overstated?
Always?
Oh, I think pretty much. I mean, there's always, you always have a mayor worried, saying, don't, except in an election year, when you tend to have more expanse. I mean, Giuliani, in particularly, in some degree, gave away the store in 1997 when he was running for re-election. I mean, are these all valid concerns? I mean, should people?
Yeah, I think there's real reason to be concerned. I think we try, at least at IBO, we try hard not to be doom and gloom all the time. I think there was a real concern amongst financial analysts that for a number of years, business income taxes and these property transfer taxes were literally growing year in and year out at double-digit rates.
Mm-hmm.
And that just wasn't sustainable.
I got the goodbye sign. I always make deadline. I want to thank everybody for joining us. This is a very complicated subject, and it affects all of our lives. And thank you. See you next time.
Thanks.
Well done.